I'm almost 50, strong, clear, energized. Training hard, living clean, fully alive. But it didn't start here. 30 years ago, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and I felt hopeless. But I chose a different path. No meds, just science, discipline, and results. Now I'm symptom-free and asking the tough questions that move us all forward. This is Hope and Health. Let's go. Welcome to Hope and Health. Today we're talking to Ashley King, writer, performer, and creator of Static, a Party Girl's memoir. Ashley, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Ashley, this podcast is Hope and Health, and normally we follow stories about people who are overcoming chronic illness, but we also like to showcase unbelievable and incredible personal stories and journeys. And Ashley, your story is one of those. So thank you for joining us. I'm just going to let you introduce yourself and where this all started for you.
Yeah, of course. Well, again, thank you for having me. My story is a little bit unusual, but yeah, like you said, I'm an actor, a writer, a performer, a podcaster, but I'm also visually impaired. I'm legally blind, and I lost my eyesight very unexpectedly about 14 years ago when I was backpacking through Bali and I was poisoned by methanol in a drink that was illegally served to me in a bar. And as a result, most people die from it, but as a result, I lost my eyesight from it. Thankfully, I was able to be hospitalized in New Zealand, which is part of the reason why I'm here. But it meant that at 19, I went blind and had to learn how to live my life, with a disability and all the things that come with that, with accepting having a disability, accepting that my life was going to look different. One of those things that I realized I wasn't going to be able to do was be an actor, which is what I always kind of thought that I would do. So I kind of gave that up and went into the depression phase of like being diagnosed with something really difficult.
Your story for our audience, I think, will be really important because you said it in what you just shared with us, how it just changed your life. Like being diagnosed with something. Suddenly your whole life was just different in an instant. Let's go back to that time if you're okay with that. Like what led up to that? You're 19 years old. I can only theorize you're enjoying your life. You're having a great time. And suddenly, what happened?
Yeah, I mean, I had been backpacking and living in Australia for like 5 or 6 months earlier to being poisoned in Bali. So I was like 18, living my best life, away from home for the first time, like seeing what it was like to be independent and have to be an adult and, not have my parents to fall back on. And so if anyone who's traveled and backpacked, like that naturally is just a very fun experience to be in. I had already gone into university, but I was thinking maybe I want to change what I actually applied to. Like maybe I'm going to do this. Maybe I'm going to try that. Maybe I'm going to actually pursue acting more seriously. So I was imagining what my life was going to look like when I came home after traveling, and then just being poisoned by methanol and being told that you should be thankful because you could have died, but now you're blind. It's kind of hard to be thankful for something that you weren't expecting, or that you didn't think you put yourself in a precarious position for it to happen to you. I felt it was something that happened out of nowhere, and I didn't know that methanol poisoning happened in Bali, that it was something that I had to be aware of or be wary of.
No.
I did what most people do on vacation. Like I went out for a drink on my last night in Bali, and as a result, it left me blind, which isn't something that, I was privy to prior to going to Bali. There's no one for me to blame, but then do I blame myself? And then, I was so independent for the last 6 months leading up to it. Then having my mom to come to New Zealand to basically bring me back home, and coming back home and then not being able to do, I would look at my car that I couldn't drive anymore. Like the job that I used to have serving, I couldn't do anymore. I was supposed to go to university. I couldn't do that anymore. And then I was looking at all my friends who were doing all these things, like going on dates and, living life after high school and when you're in university and you're a young, 20-something-year-old. I couldn't do all those things, or I didn't know how to do them yet.
Can you share more about methanol poisoning awareness. To be honest, I hadn't even heard of this really until we met.
Yeah. So methanol poisoning is something that happens all around the world, especially in developing countries. It's super prominent in Southeast Asia, but it happens in Greece, in India. It just recently was happening in Brazil. But basically what will happen is a lot of these countries, their alcohol is not as regulated as we'd see in a developed country like Canada. And so restaurants, bars, hotels, anywhere that serves alcohol instead will buy alcohol off the black market. This alcohol is homemade alcohol that is being distilled. Sometimes it's being distilled right, but in other cases, it's being improperly distilled where during the distillation of hard alcohol, there is meant to be a portion of the alcohol that should be removed because that can contain methanol. But in some cases, it's not removed. And then that is then sold back to restaurants, bars, and hotels. Or in other cases, methanol is actually added. Industrial methanol is actually added to raise the volume so that there's just more liquid that can be sold back to these hotel bars and restaurants. And so I think the problem is in a lot of these developing countries, a lot of these bars and restaurants are owned by maybe not the most reputable individuals. So like maybe some of the gang population, people who are more concerned about money than they are concerned about the safety of their patrons. And so when that alcohol is then served to you, it smells no different, it tastes no different than ethanol. And it can take anywhere from like right then and there when you have the drink up to 72 hours later for you to be affected. So in my case, I wasn't affected until about like 50 hours later when I had traveled to New Zealand was when the poison started to take effect. And it has like about an 80% mortality rate. Most people do die from it. So when you are poisoned in these developing countries, often you're having to be hospitalized in these developing countries where maybe English isn't the language that they speak. They don't have the resources or the staff to be able to treat you appropriately. So a lot of the times it's Westerners that are, and a lot of locals who end up dying and passing away from methanol poisoning. I am quite fortunate that I'm here. I've survived it because there are so many people who have not survived methanol poisoning. And you know, there just about almost a year ago to the day, there was 6 backpackers in Laos that were all poisoned by methanol and they all died, including others who were poisoned that went blind or maybe didn't have any lasting effects. But it is something that happens all around the world. And, you know, I've posted about it on my social media and I've made videos and I've shared it. And it took me 13 years to properly share it, my experience on social media. And I've realized how many people I've actually like opened their eyes, quote unquote, opened their eyes to methanol poisoning that didn't know about it. But again, if I would have shared that maybe 3 or 4 years ago, just some of the backlash you get on social media, I don't think I would have been strong enough for it if I would have shared it a couple of years ago. But I'm in a place in my life now where like talking about my eyesight doesn't affect me like the way it used to.
What was it like for you to come to it? I don't know how I'm trying to say acceptance of that this was going to be your new reality.
How do I phrase this? I have less memories of me being sighted and I have more memories now of me being non-sighted. So like, I lost my vision at 19. So like in a couple of years, I'll have been sighted as long as I've been non-sighted. And I feel like, you know, part of even so like the first, 7 or 8 years of my life, you don't really remember those, So I'm really like, the only memories I really have is like a little bit after high school and being like middle school and stuff like that, where now I'm like, a lot of the monumental moments of my life that have changed for me, like, graduating from university, like having relationships, accomplishing things in my 20s, like those are the things I look back on and I'm like, oh yeah, like I did that all not sighted. So I always say, like, the more that I like tick off my bucket list and the more that I accomplish, the more I realize I'm like, you know what, like I can live this life with a visual impairment and, there's no cure for it. There is nothing that's going to bring my eyesight back one day. I mean, science is always changing maybe, but I kind of had to give up that hope that one day I would get my eyesight back and just accept that, like, if this is what my life is going to look like for forever, can I find purpose in my life and a reason to exist despite, my visual impairment? And if you would have met me 14 years ago, I would have been like, I don't want to help anybody. I just want to like live my life selfishly. And there's no need for me to make a difference or anything. Like, I just want to be a selfish little 19-year-old and do whatever I want. But obviously, the older I've gotten, the privilege that I have that I can help people, or I can, be a role model for somebody who comes after me with maybe sudden vision loss or a sudden disability that they've come into. Like, I have so much privilege that I could help that person or help guide them, because that's what I've looked to, is like what mentors are out there for me that I can look at, say like as actors or performers that have a visual impairment and are like making it happen despite their visual impairment.
Ashley, when this happened, what was the medical system like for you?
The medical system was difficult. I feel like I really fell through the cracks. And when I tell my story to other folks in the medical system today, they're always quite shocked. I feel like I was a little bit unique because I was hospitalized in New Zealand. And then in order for them to release me as a patient in New Zealand, they wanted me to transfer to Canada as a patient and instantly start seeing doctors here. But when they transferred me, doctors here treated me like I was on a wait list to see a specialist. So I had just gone blind and didn't have an appointment to see a doctor for like 2 months until I came back to Calgary, until my eyesight started changing even more and I started losing more of it. Then I finally got in to see a doctor and they were like, oh, wow, we should have seen you right away. And I was like, yeah, probably. But then even after that, I think a lot of people expected that I would go to like rehab or something, but there was no like rehab for me. The best they had was directing me to the CNIB, which is the Canadian National Institution for the Blind. And again, that's a non-for-profit that does that. It has so much turnover. And although they're doing really great work, there's only so much money that they have to help, their clients that they have. And so I found that when I went blind, it was a lot of me just figuring things out on my own. There were like a couple things that were recommended to me, apply for this grant or, try this. But it was a lot of me just like figuring out different methods of how am I going to learn how to cook for myself? How am I going to figure out, how to do my makeup in the mornings? And I don't really feel like the medical system was of great help to me in comparison to like now. I had an eye appointment a couple of weeks ago, and the doctor that I have is like very engaged and curious about ways that, maybe glasses might help me a little bit, or AI glasses might help me. And I just didn't have that kind of engagement when I first lost my eyesight. It was kind of like, here's an antidepressant because it's going to be hard, and send me on my way.
So you have a sudden disability. What do you do? What's day one like?
After you're done crying? Honestly, it was, it's funny now, but a lot of it was like a bit of me being in denial that I could still do everything. I thought I could, take a taxi downtown and go meet up with my friends for dinner, and then, walk across the street to the 7-Eleven and grab something. Or I just like believed that I could see more than I actually could. And then when I tried doing those things, I realized I was putting myself in a lot of really unsafe situations where I was, the first couple of months I was hit by a taxi, and I was in denial of how blind I actually was. Now it's been so long, I'm like, oh yeah, I definitely can't do that on my own. Like, I need assistance with that. But at the beginning, I was very much in denial, and I didn't want to ask for help. I struggle with it now, but like when it first happened, I did not want to ask for help at all. I did not want to be a burden, and I didn't want to tell anybody that I was blind. So I would lie to everybody and say, oh, I'm just not wearing my contacts, or I just had LASIK eye surgery, just because I definitely had my own internal ableism that I had never had to deal with before. And I was worried about how people were going to treat me with a disability. And don't get me wrong, people did treat me differently. But I was so worried about how I would probably treat somebody that was blind that I expected everyone was going to treat me, poorly or think that I was weird or different, or they wouldn't want to be my friend, or whatever it might be. Like I did not want to ask for help. I didn't want to bring attention to my blindness. And I also had the same issue where people wouldn't believe that I was blind when I would finally tell them, just because I don't really give off the stereotypical idea of a blind person that's often perpetuated in pop culture. I don't have sunglasses on. I don't have a cane. I don't have a dog. Most people just think that I'm always really intoxicated, or there's something else wrong with me that's not possibly a visual impairment. But I've gotten better at being able to tell people about it now. So I guess to answer your question, how do you first deal? It's a struggle. You struggle and you try to find normalness, I guess, and routine and structure. I had no routine. I had no structure. I couldn't just go to a job every day like I was used to doing prior to leaving. I wasn't going to university. Trying to find accessible technology because I didn't know anything. I had a BlackBerry at the time. BlackBerries are not accessible. Trying to find things like that. But again, because I didn't really have the support of being Apple's actually super accessible. If you had an iPad, that'd be super accessible. So it was a lot of trial and fail and trial and fail.
Were you really surprised how accessibility issues were such a challenge in today's world?
Yes. I look at what I can do on my phone today in 2025, and it is amazing what I can do on my phone now compared to what I could do in 2012. And a lot of the technology that was available, or quote unquote available to me at that time, were technologies that cost $4,000 or $2,000. First I had to get a new iPhone, so that cost money. Then I had to get an iPad, and that cost money. Money I didn't have, money my family maybe didn't have. But now there's apps that are so helpful for things. There's AI that's really helpful for things. Now that I know I have many more accessible tools in my toolkit, I can almost do everything on my own. But there was so much I couldn't do at that time, and then I didn't want to ask for help. So yeah, it was really difficult and a struggle.
Now, did you gravitate towards a community of people who were struggling with similar things?
No, not necessarily, because I think a lot of the folks that I was meeting, say through the CNIB, were maybe not necessarily my age demographic. And so I kind of felt well, nobody knows what it's like to be 19 and blind. And, now with social media, I could literally Google that and I could find somebody on social media talking about it on TikTok. But at the time, no one was doing that on social media. No one was doing that on YouTube. So there wasn't even someone that I could look to. When I say I felt like the only person in the world going through what I was going through, not to mention it was because of methanol poisoning. There was also not many other methanol poisoning victims that I knew around the world. So I remember trying to look online and Google and try and find other people this had happened to, and maybe they had gotten their eyesight back. Maybe, they could tell me how they worked through what they were going through. So I felt like I needed a support group. If I had cancer, there'd be a support group I could go to, but there was no support group for methanol poison victims that went blind. Most of the people that I was finding were dying from methanol poisoning. So then I was also faced with the idea that I was not being grateful that I was here. I very much turned to the friends that I had at the time, a lot of them who are still my friends today, but I did obviously lose a lot of friends as well. But at the same time, when you're 19 or 20, you don't know how to be there for yourself, let alone to be there for someone who's gone through something so extraordinarily difficult. A lot of my friends and family didn't know how to be there for me. And then I didn't know what to ask for and didn't want to ask for help. So I feel like if I went blind today, there would be more resources in terms of technology. There would be more advocacy in terms of social media, and just more interconnectedness with different communities around the world. I have a community of blind folks around me now. I have a community of methanol poisoning folks around me now. My friends, totally understand me and get me, and I know how to advocate for my visual impairment way better now if I was to meet somebody new. But it was, I think, just a hard time that during those 2000s, and I was just, I needed help, but I didn't know how to ask for it.
Going back to that time, what were your coping mechanisms and how did you learn to finally ask for help? Or did you?
That's a great question. My coping mechanisms, I don't feel like you know what? I know I didn't have any because I also refused therapy. And now that I've actually properly gone to therapy and talked in nauseam about everything that I've gone through, I know what like my triggers are when it comes to not feeling independent and like that I have to depend on somebody. And you know, I've talked to therapists about this now, whereas when this first happened to me, I did not want to go to therapy. I did not want to talk about how to cope with it. I did not want to hear that I was resilient or brave or strong. I feel like I listened to a lot of Netflix. I probably daydreamed a lot about what I wanted my life to look like. I would say I didn't have a lot of coping mechanisms, which is probably why I struggled so much. You know, when I struggle now, I know like, you know, I want to just cut off from the world and be in bed, or, you know, maybe I'm going to order some takein, or I'm going to cuddle my dog or something like that. But I definitely didn't have those coping strategies then. And I would highly recommend that if you go through something as traumatic as losing your eyesight or gaining a sudden disability, to find those coping mechanisms, because it would probably be very helpful.
When I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, I actually went out of my way to avoid being around people with multiple sclerosis. I tried my absolute best to maintain what I thought was a normal life. But I think there was a lot of pitfalls for me in trying to do that. Did you find something similar?
Yes, I can absolutely agree, because I was like I said, I was connected with other folks who were blind, but not a lot of folks in my demographic. And the one time that I did meet somebody in my demographic, I was like, no, we don't need to be friends.
Same thing happened to me.
I'm fine with my own friends that I already have. We probably don't live the same life. You probably have less, like, I looked at it like, there's no way we could relate. Like, all we can relate is on our blindness, but anything else in life, we have nothing else to relate about. Like, we probably live such different lives. And again, that was me. That was like my internalized ableism, like being judgmental of somebody else who was blind, not thinking that they had like a life worth living, because they likely did. And I know they did, because I just thought I was like, I'm not part of this category. I'm not part of this blind community. And now sometimes it's the most refreshing thing to be able to talk to somebody else who either has a disability or is blind, and they just like can finish my sentence about being frustrated about something. I wish I was more open to that, but like you said, I very much was apprehensive to allow anybody in that I thought wouldn't understand what I went through, because they didn't lose their eyesight the way that I did. They didn't know what life was like prior for me and how great my life was. Yeah, I can very much relate to that.
It's such I get goosebumps talking to you, Ashley, because I know we have different challenges in our life, but there's so many similarities to our journey. As I was training to be a young actor myself, I was working professionally. I was at theater school. All these types of dreams and aspirations. And for, there's times there that I questioned if that was even going to happen for me. And I think that for me, it's and for our audience who doesn't know this, we came across Ashley's story because we were both nominated for the Alberta Motion Picture Award for Best Podcast. And when you won, and we lost, which is totally fine, I distinctly remember seeing you up there and I thought, she's figured it out. She figured it out. She told her own story, and now her story is being lifted up, and that's the point.
Oh, thank you for saying that. I do not feel like I figured it out. I feel like an imposter all the time. But again, I feel like also the thing about being like an actor, which you would understand, is that you get a lot of no's and you get a lot of rejection. And the thing about having a disability is you get a lot of no's and you have a lot of rejection. And don't get me wrong, that's still very difficult and very hard. And you have to have a really tough skin, I feel like, to be an actor and have all the rejection that you have, because it's always so out of your hands. But I feel like because I know what that feels like with a disability, to my core, that sometimes I just kind of ignore these no's. Like I know I've received a no, but if I'm just going to pivot and find a different way that is going to turn this into a yes. Just because it's almost like no has no weight to it anymore. I hear it so often that I'm going to pivot and, find another way. And again, I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for a lot of the really lovely support that I have around me now, and like the people who have been allies with me and like have seen what I've wanted to create and seen like how it could be something good, and supported me in that way. So like I wouldn't have been able to do the play if I didn't have people that supported me. If I didn't have the mentors that I did, I wouldn't have been able to do the podcast if it wasn't for my amazing producer who saw something in it. And sometimes when other people see something in it, it allows you to then see it, because I kind of thought, I was like, I don't think my play is going to go anywhere. Like, I don't think anyone's going to care about this. Like, this is just a vanity project for me. Like, no one's ever going to come out and watch it. But then, yeah, the shockingness that we were able to turn into a podcast, that the play and podcast have like received awards and people have been really receptive to it, I think is such a shock. And I think just again goes to show, which I said at the award show, that those with a disability, whether it's just an employee or a performer or whatever it might be, have something to say. You just have to give them the opportunity to say it. And in my case, I made my opportunity. But there's just so many more, instances where folks with a disability should have the opportunity to share their story. And I think everybody has a story to share. Like, even if it's like, you didn't experience methanol poisoning, I've never experienced MS, but I'm 100% sure there's many things that we can relate to that we already have today.
And I guess the point I'm trying to make, and hope I'm being clear, is that what I've learned in my journey, it wasn't until I told my own story that I had such success.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd had a successful career before, but it wasn't until I came forward with my own problem or issue that things really changed for me. And what I've learned is that even though how hard that process was, it staggered me how many people we've been able to reach through it. And I think I can see that in your journey happening right now as we're talking.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Like doing my play and the podcast was me being 100% authentically myself, like sometimes to a fault, in sharing my like true story. But compared to like any other role that I've played prior or any other journalism story that I've shared, the thing that I've made the most difference is like completely leaning into like my visual impairment, completely leaning into like who I am, like this loud, wild, blind little Mexican that I am, and leaning into that and sharing it. And I think it's so easy to fear how you'll be received and how if people will accept you. Because like we said, we get no's so often. But it doesn't feel like it's me. It feels like this is somebody else's thing and I'm just working on it. And I have to sometimes take a moment to take a step back and be like, oh no, like I actually did have an effect on somebody, or someone was able to relate to my story. My story did have a positive outcome in some way or another. And I just don't think I was expecting any of that when I set out to start doing all of this when I first started.
But now that you have, are you seeing the impact of sharing your story?
I am, but I still feel like an imposter. I still feel like, why me? Why have I been so privileged to be able to share my story in the way that I have been? I still struggle when I go to events and whatnot, and people ask like, what do you do? And I'll say what I do, but I very much downplay what I do. And I struggle to, speak from the chest about what I do, but then I'll be with somebody who'll be like, no, let me actually rephrase everything that she just said, because she's been doing all these like really great things. And I think I still feel like awkward taking up space. Even though I encourage everybody else to take up space, and I don't want to be like, just this person that takes up all this space. And so I feel like I still feel like an imposter, but I'm trying to work on that. Like my story has had a positive outcome on myself, and on other people. And that I should continue to like see the good that it's brought. And you're right, like it's made the most change. Telling my story has made the most change in my life by telling my story, not someone else's story. And I think it still just shocks me because I've lived it for so long that people are so invested or care.
Have you found your life's purpose in this?
I feel like yes and no. I think purpose always changes with growth and as your life changes and evolves. But where my current life is right now, I feel like, yeah, like storytelling is my purpose. Hopefully, like connecting people is my purpose. I hope my purpose is, you know, advocating for those disabilities and advocating for methanol poisoning awareness, but also like making people laugh by being on a stage or on a podcast or in whatever creative endeavor that I'm doing. So maybe not, I haven't totally found it, but I have more purpose now than I think I've ever had in my entire life.
You know, one of the things that I believe to be true about my own life, and I do wonder if it's true about everyone's life, is that we will find our purpose in our own struggling. Mm-hmm. Do you think that's true?
Yeah. Because had I not gone blind, I don't know what life purpose I would have had. Like, I do think that I had to lose my eyesight to find my purpose and to make more of a difference. Who knows? Maybe I could have been sighted my entire life and still made change and made a difference and made a purpose in this world. But I don't really believe that I would have. I think I would have maybe lived a more like selfish, mundane life. And I think losing my eyesight has allowed me to find the purpose. But I feel like I'm exactly where it is that I want to be. I just took a really weird roundabout way to get here.
My story's, it's not as dramatic. I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis at 19. So I can relate to just a sudden shift, not to that extreme. And I also can relate to you lose friends at that time. And all of a sudden, different people start coming into your life. There's loss that happens both from how I look at myself to how others treat me to who are my peers going to be. How did you get out of that?
It was really hard. And, I think even to this day, 14 years later, I don't know if I am totally out of it. I think people always ask, or like, how did you get over, losing your eyesight, or how did you move on with your life? I'm like, well, what was my other option? My other option was to not be here anymore.
Right.
And so I feel like the way that I moved past it was checking things off on a to-do list. Okay, I've always wanted to go to university. I'm gonna go to university. I'm going to, despite the odds and despite the challenge, I'm gonna find a way to do it. Or, the first time that I traveled again, I'm I've always wanted to keep on traveling. So going on that first trip. But again, I'm as strong as I am based on the people around me. I do require a lot of help to do things. And, if going on that first trip, I wouldn't have been able to do it on my own. I definitely needed good friends to be around me in order to go backpacking again. But I think people meet me today, or they hear my podcast, or they see my play and they're like, wow, you're just so resilient and you've accomplished so much. I'm like, yeah, but you didn't see me when it was really bad.
Right.
You didn't see how awful of a person I was for 3 or 4 years. I was mean to people. I was angry with people. I was jealous that other people could see and I couldn't see. I was jealous that other people were doing, these fun things you do in your early 20s that I couldn't do, or maybe wasn't getting invited to do because it was different hanging out with me now. I was mad that I felt like I was being robbed of my 20s and my youth. And in that regard, I feel like I'm kind of behind a lot of my friends. I think if I look at my friends now who are all ready to have babies and getting married, and I only just am maybe that's what I want. I feel like I had these years where I had to sit in anger and in sadness. But I do think that disability, when your life changes, it's an ongoing, ever-changing relationship that you have with it.
Ashley, for someone who is just experiencing a sudden disability, what would your number one piece of advice be?
That you don't have to be strong. That you should feel empowered to struggle. Because I think So in my experience, right off the bat, people wanted to say how strong and how brave I was, and, that I was, making the most of a difficult situation. And it felt like I always had to put this like face on that I was okay with it and that I was getting on and getting through and getting by. But like really I was struggling. I was struggling by myself. I was struggling in my bedroom. And then, something would happen and I would completely break down and my friends and family would be like, where did this come from? Like, we thought you were totally okay. And I was like, I think disability can make other people uncomfortable as well and make them feel like if you're okay and I'm doing okay, then they can be okay too. But I think what would have helped me accept it a lot faster or come to some sort of acceptance, whatever that looks like, was just being more honest that I wasn't okay. Because, then 5 years later, I'm breaking down and I'm being hospitalized because I'm not doing well. And everyone's like, I thought you were doing great. Like, I had gone to university, I'd graduated from university, I had a job, like my life, I had a partner, my life looked, I guess, normal and healthy on the outside. But like what I was actually feeling on the inside was that I was struggling a lot. And yeah, I ended up in the hospital for like self-harm and just not wanting to deal with it anymore. And I think that was a big turning point for me because it was like the ultimate point of me asking for help, because I've always been so bad to ask for help. And I've always wanted to believe that I could be at 100% capacity like an average sighted person. And I have to kind of realize that like my capacity may not be that of a fully sighted person, but also my capacity might be, just fine the way that it is. And so, yeah, ending up in the hospital was kind of a bit of a turning point for me that I realized I'm like, oh, I maybe do need to see a therapist to talk about the trauma of losing my eyesight. If you've gone through something really horrible, like that sucks. And you should be allowed to feel that way.
Now, how do you think people can do that? I mean, I can only share my own journey. I was not good at that whatsoever and had its consequences later in my life. Mm-hmm. But I think when you're a young person or in any stage of life, when things shift so suddenly, right? It's just, I've often tried to compare it to an athlete that's mid-race and hurts their leg and just keeps trying to run on it. Mm-hmm. You don't know how to stop. You see the finish line, you're just going. How do you find the time or those moments now where you can just put the brakes on and tell people, I need help right now?
Well, I'll say an example. On the weekend, I was at a restaurant and I was with my 3 girlfriends and we were going to have some food and some drinks. And before I sat down, they pulled a girlfriend aside and said, we can't serve your friend. She's intoxicated. And my friend was like, no, she's actually visually impaired. Like, that's why she's holding on to us. That's why we're helping her get to the table. And they didn't want to tell me because they didn't want me to feel hurt by that. And, I came back to the table and went to, order myself a glass of wine. And the server was like, no, I'm just doing my job. You're clearly too intoxicated. And, my friends were starting to get upset. They're like, we've already told you, like, she's blind, she's visually impaired. And I was like, it's fine, guys, it's fine. Don't worry about it. Like, I'm fine. I'm totally fine. And they were like, it's not okay. Like, this isn't okay. And I wanted the night not to be ruined. I didn't want to put a damper on the night. And then I just started crying. And my friends gave me the space to not be okay. Whereas, Ashley a couple of years ago would have just like bit my tongue, sat there, felt uncomfortable, felt bad, felt, judged, had a really bad night, but I would have kept it to myself. But I think having a really great support system that allows you to feel all the feels and feel what you're feeling, and allow you, if you're that person in a race, to stop, to help you run and finish the race. And a lot of that is like come with time of me learning how to advocate for myself. I really struggled to advocate for myself and my needs. And it's probably because I started working in disability culture. Like, I work for a deaf and disabled theater company here in Calgary. So just being around the conversation of disability more often has allowed me to be more comfortable with speaking about it and like what I need in a moment. And kind of what my boundaries are. So, after that night, feeling really crappy and awful. Like I went home and I was supposed to attend an event yesterday, but I was like, no, I'm allowed to take this. And, I don't have to be strong for everybody. I can take the day and just lay in my bed and lay with my dog so I can show up and be better on Monday rather than like carry this on for the rest of my week.
When someone has an accident or is poisoned like you or is diagnosed with a chronic illness and they may feel like their life is over, what would you say to them?
It's not over. Your life is just going to look different. And I think you'll find that purpose and that reason despite whatever the thing is that you've come into. I often think that there was life before losing my eyesight, but there's also life after. And unfortunately, it is what you make it. And I think the more that you accomplish, the more that you set off and do, the more that you realize like you can do everything that you did prior, it just is going to look a little bit differently. And maybe you need extra help. Just maybe you'll find a different purpose that you didn't know that was there for you prior to whatever you've come into.
What do you want to do now?
Oh my God, what don't I want to do? I would love to see this podcast continue on in another iteration that is more focused on methanol poisoning awareness. I'm hoping to travel my play that I wrote and presented last year here in Calgary. I hope to continue to make art and spread awareness about disability and methanol poisoning, and like hopefully also open the doors for other folks who will come after me that, are hoping to maybe do something similar to what I've done, because I have a lot of privilege in the situation that I'm in, and I've been given a lot of opportunities and I don't take that for granted. So if I can offer that to somebody else and help, with guidance that maybe I could have used a little bit more of when I lost my eyesight, I hope to do that.
Ashley, thank you so much for sharing your story. You're doing incredibly important work. Thank you for you, and thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Hope and Health is made possible through generous donations. To learn more or support the show, visit mshope.com, where you'll find free science-based resources.